Hello, and welcome to the Smart Injury Doctors Podcast, the injury market's top program for doctors, lawyers, and insurers who want to gain greater insight on how to improve patient recovery results and deliver better services in the U.S. injury market. Please welcome your host, Dr. Jeffrey Allen Kronk.
Okay, doctors, today what I want to talk about is what is the difference between a CRMA and a general x-ray read? And the differences are huge. So I want to take that up because so many providers today fall into the trap of, the insurer, or let's say the patient was in an auto accident and they went into the emergency room and the emergency took some x-rays. Maybe they even took stress x-rays. Maybe they took flexion extension x-rays. The most obvious thing that's going to occur is almost none of them take upper cervical A to P open mouth lateral bend to check the craniocervical junction, which is the biggest problem with mild traumatic brain injury patients, or those that have the symptoms of a concussion, because you practically just avoid the cervical profile that everyone learns on every single certification program in the mild traumatic brain injury. Let's start there. But let's actually back up and say, what does the radiologist do? So first of all, you have the images. You take the images. That's usually with a rad tech. In your office, it might be you. So you're the rad tech. You're the chiropractor. You're the rad tech. And then you might read your own x-rays. So you're like the radiologist as well. So that's called global component of billing. One's a technical component. One's a professional component. And the professional component is doing the read itself. So in the hospital, or in the emergency room, or in any medical center generally, what happens is that the x-rays come through, and then if anybody has ever listened to a radiologist read x-rays, if you have never done this, you need to go do it. Because these radiologists can read an x-ray a set of x-rays in a minute. I think I read somewhere, don't hold me to this, but I think I read somewhere where the average time it takes to look at one plate or one image, so let's say there's 6 images, is under 5 seconds, right? So if you had 6 images, or you had a 7-view, or you had a 9-view Davis series, and it's 5 seconds, I mean, you're taking 45 seconds to look at it, under that. And so that's what they're looking at. Now, that is ultra, that's uber fast. And I know, a lot of times when radiologists will say, well, no, they don't want to say, hey, look, I do a lumbar set of x-rays in 10 seconds. That's how long it takes me to look at a set of lumbar x-rays. And I can determine all of this stuff in 10 seconds. I can determine there's no instability. I can determine there's no signs of instability. I can determine there's no subluxation. I can determine there's no fracture, which they're very good at. I can determine there's no infection, which they're very good at. I can determine all these things in 10 seconds, and they don't want to say, well, gosh, you're in a trial. How long did it take? It took 10 seconds. They don't want to say that because it doesn't sound right. So they have to be pushed on it. But if you said, well, okay, if we went back and we subpoenaed your dictation, how long did it take you to read that set of x-rays? 9 seconds, 14 and a half seconds. Okay, it does not take long. Now, that's because they're not looking. What they're looking for is gross errors, gross phenomena, gross pathology, fractures, infections, dislocations. They're looking for very gross things in the spine, degenerative changes, okay, maybe loss of curve. So even if you have flexion extension, I mean, I've spent too much time. There's no radiologist in 30 seconds that can take a flexion extension film and basically say, here's where the instability is and here's where it's not, because instability findings are something you can't see. You certainly can't see angular findings. And translation findings, I would put up any doctor in the world. I don't care how good you are. You can't see these findings. You can't see the difference between a 0.9 millimeter back and forth translation and a 2 millimeter translation. You just can't see it. You don't have the ability to look at it, especially when you're looking at it for 5 seconds. There's no ability to do that. So make no mistake, that is not a ligament analysis. That's not an excessive motion test. What an excessive motion test look like, and I see a lot of times, you'll have a radiologist, or a lot of times in the DAC bar world, there's a chiropractic radiologist world. You'll see, okay, they pulled one line, or they said, hey, at C3, C4, there's a 3.6 millimeter translation or whatever. But you won't see what are the translations on all the other vertebra. You won't see what are the angular findings in those vertebrae. So you won't see an excessive motion test. An excessive motion test is a test that takes whatever the visible vertebra are. So let's say you've got C7 and it's visible. Good. It's going to start at C7 and it's going to work its way all the way up. In the cervical spine, if you also have an A to P open mouth, lateral bend, you're going to see C1 and C2. So all the way up, you're going to see the translation and you're going to see angular findings. And so it's an assessment, and it's not an easy assessment to do. It's a time-consuming assessment to do. For any of you out there that have software, you've tried to do it, it's super time-consuming. Now, I have been around this industry the longest. There isn't anybody that's been in this space longer than I have currently in the country. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've assisted with correction of 2 systems when I first came into the market. That was back in 2005. And just to give you an idea, that in 2005, it was still a lot of plain film and processors, right? So digital hadn't really it was just starting to come into play in 2005. And so, we went from DOS to Windows, and it was like, oh my God, the world changed. So, from there, I corrected 2 systems, then created a system, and created a system that the radiologists use, created 2 of them actually, and then also got into the fact where I was recently, for the last 3 years, we assisted in the production of a AI that auto-detects this condition, an FDA-cleared technology that auto-detects it, which puts it in a whole new league. It's just a whole nother game. It's a whole nother, it's a evolution in this process, or in this science, and in the delivery of the science. But it is very, very different. So when I see, like on IMEs, when I see radiologists contest a report, one, I know they don't have software to do it. 2, I know that they don't have angular accuracy to do it, especially in the softwares. And no PAC system has a angular methodology to do like AMA angular methodology. It just doesn't. And what you'd have to construct and jerry rig and in order to do it is not even remotely accurate. And then I also see a lot of inaccuracy in the softwares that are out there. There's some softwares out there, especially in my market, the chiropractic market. There's some really bad softwares. I mean, they're bad. And so, but the providers that use them don't know, because they don't know. They've just been sold on an idea, much like I was when I first bought my first system and went, wow, this thing's inaccurate, and I helped the company to actually correct it. And then when I bought my second system that was supposed to be so great, and as soon as I bought it, went, wow, this one's inaccurate too, and here's why. And then, had to correct it. And so, I feel like I never wanted to walk into that part of this, this space. I just wanted to have somebody program something and have it be right, and get on with it and do the studies. But, the key thing here is that it's very, very important that you understand the difference. This is a different procedure. Now, if you're out there and you're using software and you're billing for it, you do your own x-rays, you do your own x-ray read, and then you bill for this, I think you're opening yourself up to a problem, a potential problem, that's hard for you to recover from. That's why I say, if you're out there and you're using a system, just don't bill for it. Don't bill for it. Then you take out that whole aspect of it. The findings are so significant, and the findings drive everything you're doing treatment-wise. And I've never seen anybody that needed an additional $400 to $500 or $600 on a diagnostic test when the diagnostic test could be nothing, could be something where you're not charging for it. It's not ideal. It's not ideal for you to do it yourself. It's more ideal for it to be done by an unbiased, independent third party. But let's say that you can't, you can't find somebody to do it in your area for you. Then I wouldn't bill for it. I wouldn't bill for it at all. And I would just use it, and I would use it to substantiate and to support my treatment. And that in itself becomes an unbiasedness. Obviously, if you're biased, you're going to bill for it. Now it looks like you're actually, you're invested and you're billing for it and whatnot. And also the results can be manipulated. You're not trusted on the manipulation of the results. If you're not charging for it, it takes some of the sting of that away. So that's my advice to those that are out there doing their own studies. One, I don't advise it. Two, if you are, don't bill for it. Just don't get into that game. Don't get into that habit. And if you are billing for it, make sure that the systems that you are billing for are FDA cleared. If they're not, I think you've got another thing that you're going to run into. I mean, I've seen companies come and go in this market. I'm the longest in the market. I've been here the longest, and I've seen companies come and go, and I've seen companies where I've went, wow, this is so bad and so far off, and it's only a matter of time, and then they're gone. This is an area where you do it right, do it the right way, and then you sleep good at night, and know that you're helping a lot of people. My whole reason for doing excessive motion testing was to standardize spinal injury workups. People have a 55% chance or less or greater of never fully recovering. In other words, their chance of fully recovering are 50% at best, and it may be closer to 75% of the people never fully recover, or 80%. You see studies out there 10 years, 88% are still having the same problem they had 10 years later, 10 years ago. So, these conditions are really significant in my contribution to it, and I'm not perfect. I'm not absolute. I'm still, we still improve and learn and everything else and try to improve and improve and improve. But the basics of what we do are out there. And if you're using screen capture software, we were screen capturing something to implement it into a system, and then you're putting lines on that system, and then you're calibrating to those lines. That stuff is so old. That technology is so old, and it's not accurate, and it's not. It's just not the route to go. And I'm very proud of what this section of this diagnostic testing, kind of like MRI. I'm sure MRI, when it first came out, it had some things that were like, oh, wow, this is what we're trying to do, and maybe it didn't work out. But it keeps evolving. The same with excessive motion testing. It keeps evolving. A has a big step in that. So, you want to really kind of, to wind it down, you want to make sure that you're using the best stuff that you can. And an excessive motion test is not a -22 professional component. It's a separate thing. So when you see it, if you got a report from a radiology center and you saw one level or two levels of that's what we typically see. You'll see one or two levels of translation findings. It's like, okay, that's not an excessive motion test. It's not segment to segment. The measurements aren't segment to segment, and the angular findings aren't there. That is not an excessive motion test. That's a radiology center that's actually just trying to supply a provider with what they think that provider needs. But it's like, if I'm reviewing those files, it's like incredibly easy to negate that condition, that study. So I hope that helps a little bit. The difference between a professional read or a CRMA, I really hope that helps. Doctors, if you have interest in our Smart Injury Doctors program, you look us up at www.smartinjurydoctors.com or give us a call at 800-940-6513. As always, I appreciate your time, your attention, or The other thing I'd say is if you're interested in Spinal Kinetics, just look us up at thespinalkinetics.com and set up an account with Spinal Kinetics. Doctors, as always, I appreciate your time, your attention. I look forward to delivering more content on the next podcast.
You've been listening to the Smart Injury Doctors Podcast, the #1 audio production show for professionals in the U.S. injury market that want to deliver better injury services to the patients, clients, or insureds they serve. If you like what you heard today, please leave us a review and don't forget to join us on our next program.